Hello everybody, it is Sunday the 25th of February. My goodness me, we're already 2 months from Christmas, which means of course that Christmas is only 10 months away. That was a little joke for Wendy. Welcome, very nice to be spending some time with you again this week. A bit of an introduction for those of you who are new. My name is Jared, to my family, Peter to my colleagues and friends here in Oxfordshire, and Boniface to my monastic community and friends up there in North Yorkshire and related areas. Or basically anything short of or you, I suppose, and even then or you will usually suffice to get my attention. I am a knitter and crocheter, a weaver, a spinner, and sewer and quilter, and basically anything fibre related, I'm interested in it. I live in Abingdon in Oxfordshire in the UK. I live with my two cats, Toby and Bunty, who have noticed that I'm suddenly talking to myself again, and so I've come over to investigate what on earth is going on. So I think you may have seen the tail of one of them already go past. Toby's currently rubbing himself against my tripod. Bunty has disappeared for a little while, but no doubt she'll come back as well at some point. And I think that's everything, actually, isn't it? Yes, I'm a former monk and a former bus driver, and I currently work for a bus company here in Oxfordshire. I think that's everything. So, as I say, welcome if you're a new viewer. I hope you find something of interest during this time with me today, and if you do, then don't forget to like the video and to subscribe with notifications turned on so that you'll get a notification when I next upload. At the moment I'm recording a more or less weekly schedule, but obviously things will change as in depending upon circumstances here and elsewhere, but at the moment I'm more or less weekly. And welcome back to all my regular viewers and subscribers. It's very kind of you to come back and spend yet more time with me. So, moving straight in. I don't have a finished object this week, but I do have a confession to make. I told a fib. And I told a fib for a very good reason, and I'm sure you'll understand why. The Scania shawl, it wasn't... The person for whom I made the shawl watches this podcast. She also does happen, I think, to watch... Well, certainly she watches this podcast. And so I had to tell a fib about the making the shawl because she didn't know I was making it for her. I'd said that this person had bought the wool for me to make and then I'd made it for her, but that wasn't entirely true. As soon as I saw the name of the shawl, I knew I had to make it for her. It was her birthday on Thursday the 22nd, this last week, and she used to be my boss. She used to be the operations director at my bus company, and she and her husband moved north to Carlisle to better facilitate their shared hobby, which is hill walking. So she retired at the grand old age of 40, I like to say, and because her husband's company, which is a national grocery company, were opening branches in the Carlisle and Kendal areas, and so he was able to transfer up there to help with the process of opening these new stores in new parts of the country that his company hadn't previously had any stores in. And so this was all a very positive lifestyle change for them. And so they've been up there for about 6 years now. I've only been up once. I really want to go up again this year. I intend to go up every year, but life just sometimes gets in the way, I suppose. But as operations director, she introduced some new coaches onto our London service when I was still a driver, and they were Scania coaches. They were Swedish built and named obviously after the place Scania in Sweden. And so as soon as I saw the name of the shawl, I knew that I had to make that shawl for her. So I had to I told a fib. I had to dissemble slightly because I needed to throw her off the scent that I was making this for her, but she loves it, so everything's positive. So yes, she received the parcel on Thursday and sent me a lovely text message thanking me. So that was all very positive. So there we go. As I say, I apologise for telling a fib to you all, but I'm sure you all appreciate why it was necessary. So I haven't got any other finished objects this week. I have been working on my socks, not the yellow socks, because I want to actually get these ones finished first. These are the socks I'm making with the West Yorkshire Spinners Blue-Faced Leicester Aran print. And the colourway is pheasant. I keep saying peasant, but it's pheasant, the bird. And I'll put a picture of a pheasant in here for those of you who are not familiar with this. It's a game bird in England, so it's a bird that is reared on country estates for shooting in the autumn. And the meat is very tasty, and it's I appreciate that there will be many people watching this who don't like hunting, and I've never myself been hunting, but I have to say I do like pheasant meat and also partridge, and these are not farmed birds in the sense that chickens are, but they are birds that are cared for by gamekeepers on estates in order to provide hunting opportunities in the autumn. In many ways, they have a much less stressful life, in fact, than many birds that are reared for slaughter in barns and factory cages. And these are the choices we all have to make about our lifestyle and our food and where it comes from. And we all have to acknowledge the reality that if we like meat, then that means that a living animal is killed for the sake of our food. And then you're just left with the choices of whether you have ethically sourced meat or will just take anything as long as it's cheap. And, you know, we all have to make those choices every day, and I'm not a vegetarian, although I like vegetarian food, and I'm not a vegan, although I like vegan food. I don't eat a lot of meat myself. I will only have meat maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I will have a lot of fish in my diet. I really like fish, but I'm not averse to eating meat, and that's just the way it is. And I fully accept that other people may have different views on that. But anyway, so the colourway is pheasant, and these are they. I'm doing 2 at a time taupe socks. I made a small mistake when I cast these on, in that this is correct and this is not. And the reason this is correct and this is not is because the pearl bump on the cast on row is actually on the outside. It should have been on the inside. It's virtually invisible, and I'm very happy with that. And I love the way these things are striping up. So this is 100% blue-faced Leicester wool. So in a way, I'm taking a bit of a risk in making socks with them because they don't contain any nylon to strengthen the heels and toes. And there is that potential that they'll wear through quickly. I don't think they will, and if they do, they do. But I'm absolutely loving the knit. I have once now, I accidentally, on the previous round, in fact, knit the 2 socks together because I forgot to drop one strand and pick up the other. It can get very confusing because they're not quite identical socks. They are one colour repeat away from being identical. So this is basically, this sock has got this brown more than this one, which means that at certain points they both have the same colour yarn in them. So on the previous round, as you can see, I had this grey, the grey that is here now was in fact here just one round before, so I accidentally knit across the whole row and had to then tink back and re-knit that half a row with the correct strand. But it's going well, and I'm really enjoying the knit, and it's a good knit for my bus journey home from work. I keep it in my Mrs. Brown's bag, which, as you can see, is a genuine article. It's a Mrs. Brown's bag. It's a lovely bag. I really like this bag. It's got a lovely feel to the fabric on the outside. It's not, I don't think it's an interfaced bag. If it is, it's very lightly interfaced. It could be interfaced, but it is a very light interface if there is one. I just really like the colour, and I like the style. I love the pattern, the cable pattern on the fabric, and it's a really nice bag. The only drawback with this bag is that because it came from Canada, I had to pay almost as much in import and handling charges as I did for the bag itself. But that's nothing to do with Mrs. Brown. That's entirely to do with the post office making money out of people like me, I guess. So that's my main kind of fabric content this week. I've been working on the Mandala project. There we are, Toby. Yes, the representation of the Great Pavement at Westminster Abbey, and that has been more of a theoretical working this week. I've completed the central roundel. I've now got to work on the four smaller roundels that are its satellites, but I've been using graph paper and colouring pens to work out how I'm going to actually connect them all up, because it's not going to be a simple, straightforward seaming. It's actually going to be crocheting in a couple of interesting ways. So I don't want to say more about it until I've got the idea fully straight in my head as to how it's going to work. But I am hoping that over the next 2 or 3 weeks that will move on apace, and you'll begin to see the overall effect of that. I'm just making it, that project I'm just making out of scraps of Stylecraft acrylic. Given that it's not going to be a size related object, in that measurements are not going to be important, because if it is worn, it would be worn as a wrap. It's not going to be a fitted item, so gauge and yarn types are not significant in that respect. I just thought that using some of my scraps, I've got plenty of acrylic colours that will work to recreate the effect of the pavement. And yeah, I'm quite enjoying the process of, to some extent, mindless repetition when I'm actually doing the crochet, but also the interesting challenge of thinking through how to provide a good representation of the pavement. It's not going to be a slavish copy, because it can't be a slavish copy. Different medium, different possibilities, different effects will always be rendered anyway. But I think it's going to, so far I'm happy that I'm capturing the overall effect of the mandala pavement. So there we are. I have, so that's more or less my, yes, that is the kind of yarn related area of this podcast this week completed. So it's very short, it's only 10 minutes, but it is what it is, and that's the advantage and the disadvantage of a weekly podcast, is that some weeks you're not going to have an awful lot to actually show. This week has been a difficult week, not for me actually, but for Bob and Wendy. Poor Bob was taken into hospital in the middle of the week and has had to have emergency surgery on both Friday and I think at some point today as well. More positively, it's not life-threatening, and in fact it seems to be going well, and the hope is that he will be soon back at home and in recovery mode. But clearly it's been a difficult time for him and for Wendy, and I've spent a little bit of time going up to the hospital to see them and to see Wendy at home as well. So if I could just ask for your positive thoughts and prayers for Bob for a speedy recovery, I'm sure that would be very much appreciated by him and Wendy. I do have another piece of yarn-related finished object, but it's not mine. This, I'll put a picture in here. This is a little handbag that my friend Naz, my friend at work, whom I taught to knit at the end of last year, he asked me, I'd given him, I think it was a Woolcraft cake, and he'd made 2 hats out of it for his daughters. He has 2 sons and 2 daughters, and I think, well, the youngest child is a girl, and I think she's only 2 or 3 years old. And then I think it's his second child is also a girl, and she's about 8 or 9. And so he was able to make 2 hats, 1 each for them, and when they're very happy, because it was a pink and lavenderish colouring to the yarn that I gave him. And I gave him a French knitter for Christmas, which his daughter loves making I-cord with it. So he set her off making some I-cord, and he asked me, did I have a pattern for a bag? And I said, well, I don't have a pattern, but in fact, you could just knit a straight panel, long, a certain width, but long, and do the decreases at the end, because he was used to doing the decreases for the hat. Just do some decreases, knitting 2 together, and make it into a triangular point kind of thing. I can't remember if he did that, but I'll put the picture in here. So this is a garter stitch panel, and he basically knit a long strip in the width he wanted, and then seamed the 2 sides up and sewed a button on the front and put that over, and then his daughter made a I-cord handle, which he then seamed into the bag. And so he's made this bag from scratch without a pattern, which I think is a wonderful achievement. I am hoping in the next few weeks to get him knuckling down and learning crochet as well. I think it's in a way it's the opposite. It is the same problem, but the other way round from the problem I had when I started to learn to knit. I'd learned to crochet first, and I was very happy with crochet. He has learned to knit first, and he knits, unlike me, he knits the English throwing style, whereas I knit the continental style. And I knit the continental style because I got used to holding my yarn in my left hand, so that I was using my right hand to hook the yarn, which is normal. But he, of course, having learned to knit using his right hand holding the yarn, he finds it very cumbersome and odd to be using his left hand for crochet. And I think what I just need to do is sit him down and start him working on some granny squares. Granny squares are the way to learn crochet. It's how I learned crochet. It took me 3 days, bearing in mind I had nothing else to do while I was off sick at the time. And I just, for 3 days, I kept ripping the thing out, and I kept I couldn't work out, I would make the chain of 4 and slip stitch it, and then I would start going through the chain rather than through the hole in the middle, because actually sometimes the hole in the middle is smaller than the hole that's made by the slip stitch. And anyway, it was all, the first few times it was terrible, but you have to go through the process and develop the skill so that you can improve. And so I just need to sit down with him. And I've said that we'll do this in the next week or 2. We'll just sit down in our lunch hour, and I will teach him to make granny squares, and from there he should be able to progress much further and start making some of the little amigurumis for Star Wars that I gave him, and teach his son how to do it, because that's what he hopes to do. So that's all underway. I think that's everything then in terms of, yes, in terms of all the finished objects and whips. I think I've talked myself to a standstill on that one. So I'm going to turn to acquisitions. I went to Mason's on Tuesday. I went to the wool shop, in fact, but didn't go to buy wool. I didn't even look at the wool. I know, I can't believe it either, but it is entirely true. I think I mentioned the last time that I went to the fabric shop looking for some fabric, and I found I found the fabric that I wanted, but in a pattern that I didn't. And I found the pattern that I wanted in a fabric that I didn't. Because the fabric that had the right pattern was a very tough linen style fabric. Whereas the fabric that had the wrong pattern was really soft and smooth cotton. Well, I thought, well, I might as well pop into the other Masons, because Masons in Sturt Street, which is the wool shop, also has a certain amount of fabric, which is more for curtains and upholstery rather than general art use, craft use. So it's a little bit more robust, a little bit stronger fabric. And I want to make a couple of rabbits. I'll put a picture of the pattern that I've bought for this, and as you can see, it's quite a vintage style pattern. And I have some nice vintage prints which will work very well for the summer dress that she'll be wearing. But I wanted something similar to I didn't want the plain fabric that you see in the picture, but I wanted something that would work as a kind of vintage style. Well, I went into the other Masons and found this lovely fabric. So you're getting a reasonably good representation of the colour there. It's a kind of gold on cream effect, and it's a little, I think if I bring it close you can see there are lots of little flowers and ferns. And I just think that will work extremely well for the body of the rabbit, or rabbits, because I will be making at least two, because I've got two little babies coming hot on the heels of each other at the middle of this year, which I will talk about in a moment. So I think what I might do, I do have some very nice pale brown plain fabric, which I may use for the actual face pieces, and just use the rest of the fabric for the ears and the back of the head and the body, just so that you can see the face better. But I'm not entirely sure, but I do like that fabric, and I'll make it work somehow. So that's where I'm going. So, two babies, yes. My youngest niece announced a month ago that she and her fiance are going to be having a baby. She got engaged, or she told me she was engaged to her fiance last September, and she told me just before Christmas that she thought she was pregnant, but she was waiting until the end of January and the scan before she announced it to people, which she then announced it, and it's all wonderful news. So I'm very, very happy for them. So it's going to be quite a busy year for them. They're getting married in May, and the baby will be there, I think May, she said. I think she said May. And the baby's due at the end of July. And then hot on the heels of that piece of news came another exciting and happy piece of news. My friends Andrew and Jess, whose wedding I went to last October, both of them independently lived with me as my flatmate for a period of time, and I work with Andrew at the bus company. They are having their first child in August. So it's all hands to the pumps again. I've got two more babies coming this year, so I've got to get making more baby stuff. So, you know, it's a very happy time, and I'm delighted, but I need to make these two bunny rabbits for their babies due at the middle of the summer, really. So that's very positive, happy news, and I'm really pleased about that. It's not always, yeah. Sorry, the thought I was going to think has eluded me, so I'll just move on. But yes, excellent, wonderful, happy news. So, I went into Mason's, didn't buy any wool. Aren't I a good boy? I did go to Amazon to buy another piece of equipment which is going to strike fear into the heart of our friend Wendy. one of the things that's been stopping me from recording with Wendy, apart from her own reluctance, that is I have a microphone that I'm wearing here so that you can hear me, but I don't have two microphones that will work into the one slot. But it occurred to me that what I could do is buy a desktop microphone, which I have now done. This I have tried out, and it works just as well when set further back from me as the microphone that I'm wearing does here. So I will be taking this to Scarborough with me when I go with Wendy and Bob. It just plugs jack plug into my phone's headphone socket, as my current microphone does. And so I am removing all of the excuses from Wendy so that she will have to appear at some point in my podcast. I know she'll find it difficult. I know when I first started recording these videos, it could make you very self-conscious. You're talking to yourself. Even though I know that you're all out there listening to me, I'm sitting here talking to myself. I'll just show you the brand. Sorry, that was the brand is Tonor, which is the same brand as the microphone that I'm using. It's very lightweight. It was only it was less than £10 for the whole thing, so it's not an expensive piece of kit, but it does work well. But as I was saying, it can feel very odd sitting here talking to yourself, and talking to yourself as if you were talking to other people, and the same kind of upbeat positivity that you have when you're talking to other people. You know, most of us at some point in our lives will talk to ourselves, but we tend not to be... It tends not to be an animated conversation. It's more this is what I'm doing, and you know, thinking aloud so that you actually do the thing rather than engaging yourself in conversation. So that's my second acquisition. Sorry, I've got a cat on either side of me now, and they're both looking at me. So, yes, I keep saying so, I know. Well, I went into Oxford yesterday morning, and it's the first time I have been into Oxford to go shopping in probably 2 years. And the reason for that is just that Oxford has been undergoing a lot of rebuilding, roadworks, and a brand new shopping centre. And it's also a place which is very popular with tourists, and so is very, very busy much of the year, which is excellent for the local economy and wonderful for the people who get to come and view this beautiful city. But it can make it a bit of a chore if you just want to go in and get something and come out again. So when I do go into Oxford, I tend to go in about 8 o'clock in the morning, be there when the shops first open, get in, get out and get home before the masses begin to descend on the city. And I decided that it would be a good opportunity, as I've promised, for me to take you on another little bit of a tour. So I'm currently editing a number of little videos that I recorded yesterday morning, which will be uploaded as my second rambling on at some point during this week. So do look out for that. And the episode is about the history of Broad Street, or at least some of the history of Broad Street in Oxford, and the buildings and the people that have made Broad Street quite a famous and indeed infamous street in Oxford. But the ostensible reason for going to Broad Street was because I wanted to go to Blackwell's, which I talk about in the Rambling On video, so I won't say a lot about it here, other than to say it is a local academic bookseller which has expanded across the UK, and it's a treasure trove. When you walk into the Blackwell's building, it's the book equivalent of going into Mason's for me. It's part of the reason is that the Norrington Room in Blackwell's, which is an underground, huge, cavernous room, is the single largest room where books are sold anywhere in the world, or at least it was when it was built. It may not be now, but it certainly was when it was built back in the mid-70s. And it's just huge. But you'll see the video, so when I upload it, do pop across and see that one as well. So I went in to buy a book. Yeah. Well, I did. I bought the book, not actually the book I wanted, but a very close relative to the book I wanted. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I would like to learn a little bit more about colour theory. And I was looking around in the shop yesterday, because there is Blackwell's in Oxford, there is the main bookshop, and then there is the art and music bookshop across the road. And I wasn't sure whether colour theory would come under art, as in graphic design and colour wheels and the history of art and that kind of thing, or whether it would come under science, or whether it would come under psychology, because to some extent it has a role to play in all three, or all three areas have a role to play in understanding colour theory. So I was wandering around, looking slightly lost, pondering where I could go next to find what I was looking for. And one of the very nice assistants in Blackwell's said good morning to me. And that was actually one of the quite nice things in the shop. Every time I walked past an assistant, they said good morning to me. They didn't say, may I help? It was just good morning. And it was a nice positive reinforcement that if I did need them, they were there. But they weren't going to. They appreciated that people like to browse in bookshops and don't necessarily know exactly what it is that they want to buy until they see and have read a little bit of the possible options available to them. But this young lady was sitting at her computer, and I thought, all right, I will ask. So I said, I'm interested in colour theory, but I'm not sure whether it's going to be in art across the road, in science, or in psychology. And she said, well, that's an interesting question, because it could be in all three. So that was all fine. We started off on the right foot. Then it turned out that she herself is actually something of a colour theorist, which, I mean, purely coincidental, but quite a spooky coincidence in that sense. So she said, well, I said that I had an interest partly because I'm a crafter and just need to understand how colours work and what effect different colours together or in isolation will have on other people when they see the thing that you're doing and what you're communicating through the colours that you choose. And she thought that the likeliest place for that would be across the road in the art shop, because there are quite a lot of art theory books, and that kind of thing really would come under the art theory. But she did point out to me, and I have ordered, I don't know why I do this, Schrödinger. Most people have heard of Schrödinger's cat. He was a quantum physicist who dreamed up the thought experiment to show that quantum states, so that you could visualize the idea of quantum states. So the cat in a box, which is both alive and dead, because we can't know until we open the box whether it is alive or dead. And it's an involved idea, but that's basically the basic theory of quantum measurement, is that the act of observing changes that which is observed, that if you measure the speed at which something is moving, you can't know its position, and if you know the position of something, then you can't know the speed at which it's moving in the quantum world. But Schrödinger was, as I say, a quantum physicist, and he has also written, and it has now been translated into English, quite a heavyweight academic work on quantum theory of colour. £88 the book costs, and it costs that much not because it's huge, but because it's got a very limited readership. I've ordered a copy. I dare say I shall find it interesting, both as a mathematician and as someone who deals in colour a great deal. And it'll be interesting to see how much of a crossover there is with the more practical ideas of colour theory, which is art theory rather than theoretical. But this is the book I finally bought on the day, which was a lot cheaper than the £88, is The Story of Colour. An exploration, teeth back in, an exploration of the hidden messages of the spectrum by Gavin Evans. And what he does is he takes each of the primary colours and their mixtures from the spectrum, and he has a few pages on what they mean in a variety of different cultures, the message that they intend to convey. So, for example, it has under black, I'll just read the headings of black because I think that it's actually quite revealing. So black, evil. Because black is darkness and evil is dark, then black and evil are the same thing. But then there is the pious black, religious subjects, both before and after the Reformation. So it tended to be Dominican friars and that kind of thing before the Reformation, but then Puritans after the Reformation, that black becomes a symbol of humility and purity and religious piety. Then, of course, we move into the more modern era where we have black power and black pride, where it's not black in the sense of the absence of colour, but dark skin. And that begins to have an effect. But also, much more modern as well, the little black dress, which is about elegance and about sophistication and female beauty. And then we have the black of the Al Jolsons of this world and the minstrel phenomena of blacking up white people playing at being black people and stereotyping black culture into acceptable forms for a white audience, but also returning to the idea of black as the harbinger of doom. We have Black Monday and Black Wednesday and Black Friday, which are occasions of the failure of the stock exchange. And interestingly, in this book, although it's got black and white, it doesn't have grey. And I was struck while looking at the contents, I was reminded, rather, of a painting that I saw in the Tate Modern, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was the Tate Modern. I will put a picture of the painting in here. And it's a curious painting. It's by Gerhard Richter, who was born in the 1930s, is still alive, and who was a surrealist and an avant-garde painter, who in the 60s and 70s did a series of monochrome paintings and coined the notion of abstract painting. I think he coined, well, anyway, he was particularly involved in it. And there is one painting in particular which, for me, is a physical representation of nothing. Nothing as a philosophical idea and a mathematical idea, the absence of anything, is a very difficult thing to portray physically. Because how do you physically portray something that's not there? Nothing. And this painting achieves it for me because it uses a rather bland grey paint and paints a rather bland rectangle. And a rectangle and grey, independently, produce no emotion. They are the very definition of neutral. And so what this painting does for me is it evokes absolutely nothing, and therefore becomes an abstract representation of an abstract idea. I just thought I'd share that just because I noticed that grey doesn't actually have a slot in this book, which is, I think, a little surprising. Although I guess it's not intended to be exhaustive. So that was a book I went in to buy. I didn't buy just that book, though. I feel slightly guilty. I shouldn't do, but I do. So I will go with the ones that I got in the art shop. I was very gratified to see a book on crochet, and these are 75 crochet, colourful hexagons in crochet. That's 2 crochet. Sorry, the screen is back to front, and I'm also getting reflections as you are. So this is nothing more than just lots of different hexagon patterns that can be then combined into blankets or turned into other items, and it's just some really pretty ideas. And I think this, I quite like hexagons. I prefer hexagons to squares. I like granny squares, but I much prefer granny hexagons. So I think there are some interesting combinations in there, and it would be quite interesting to see. In fact, you can see, there we are. There are all the hexagons available to be made. I quite like the idea of this cube hexagon, which of course a hexagon map is the map of a cube in orthogonal relief. But there we go. So I found that and I bought that. And then I saw this wonderful little book, Knits and Pieces. This is it's called A Knitting Miscellany by Danielle Holke. And it's a history of knitting. Well, I mean, she calls it, let's see what it's called. We've got the history of knitting, knitting tools and fibres and jargon, different styles and types of knitting around the world in 80 stitches, what do people knit, knitting in pop culture today, and knitters' resources. So it's a kind of potted history of knitting. And the very first page, very first section, she has a quotation, but she doesn't say from whom. I turn strings into things. What's your superpower? And I thought that was quite a nice little summary of knitting and crochet. Some really interesting nuggets of information already gleaned from in here, because it's a very easy to read little book. Not least that, well, one of the problems with knitted or woven fabrics is that they're not easily preserved. Because they are made of organic... Stop that! Honestly, Toby. Because they're made of organic fibres, they will rot. So you end up with a lot of metal work, clasps and the like, but you don't end up with much fabric. There have been bits and pieces of fabric preserved, but the oldest piece of knitting that has been preserved is only 1,000 years old. And I say only 1,000, that's still a long time. The likelihood is that knitting has been around with weaving and other forms of knitting for a lot longer. Crochet is a much more recent phenomenon. It's a kind of derivation of knitting in many respects. But we know that nets were being knit by fishermen many thousands of years ago, because we have pictures in our hieroglyphs and stele in the ancient world which show fishermen's nets. So we know that there was some element of knitting going on for a very long time. It's whether woven fabrics for wearing were more common than knitted fabrics. One of the important distinctions between weaving and knitting is that weaving is effectively two strings that are intertwined. So you have the warp and the weft. Whereas knitting is one piece of string, as with crochet, is one piece of string that is constantly intertwined. So it's just a slight difference. Because it's a single piece, it might be that it is an older art form, but it's very difficult to argue from silence. There just isn't the evidence. There is the evidence of tools that we use for weaving, in particular warp weights. Sorry, I've got a cat hair there. You don't tend to have the same evidence for knitting and other forms of knitting, because again, the implements were usually made of wood or bone and very often don't survive, whereas warp weights were usually made of stone and so survive for billions of years without too much difficulty. So it's an interesting problem of trying to untangle, if you'll pardon the pun, it's trying to untangle the history of the fibre arts. There's a lot more work still to be done, and I think, you know, I've noticed that the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which is the kind of fabrication museum of London, does tend to have specialised exhibitions from time to time, and I'm looking forward to when they do one on knitted culture, because I think that would be really quite interesting to go along and see. One of the things that arises out of this, she talks about knitting in pop culture and celebrities who knit. I mentioned last week Lizzie Yarnold, who won gold medal in the women's skeleton bob, and became the only woman to successfully defend an Olympic title in the skeleton, which is excellent for her. She was interviewed afterwards, and her idea of relaxation leading up to big meets like the Olympics is Netflix and knitting. She's one of us, which is excellent news. So not only do I think she is an incredibly talented athlete, but she's one of us, something we can all celebrate. So that was all in the art shop for Blackwell's. When I went to Mason's last week, I also popped across the road into the Oxfam shop and found this lovely book, Stitched Toys, and there are some really lovely rag dolls and this lovely snail cushion toy. So there are some nice small projects as well. I'm looking for ideas that I can make with Thomas when his arm is better, and this has bits and pieces. Maybe we could make something for his mother for Easter, for example. And there are some door stops and some cushion covers and that kind of thing. So I'm quite looking forward to getting some ideas from him with there. I also bought a history book on the French Revolution, written by Georges Lefebvre and translated into English. Lefebvre was a communist, a Marxist historian, but he's recognised, at the turn of the 20th century, is recognised as one of the great historians of the French Revolution and how and why it happened. So I'm already started reading this, and I'm well into that, and it's good fun. So back to Blackwell's. I had wandered around looking at the other books because there are so many books, and I bought 4. So that was 7 altogether. No, 6 altogether. No, 7. 7, 3, yeah, 7, and plus the other 2, that's 9. Anyway, let's not worry about that. I enjoy reading popular science and popular mathematics books, always have done. And I saw this, Can You Solve My Problems?, which is a series of puzzles, mathematical puzzles to be solved. Chapter 1, Cabbages, Cheating Husbands and a Zebra. Which is a nice idea. Liars, liars. Berta says that Greta tells lies. Greta says that Rosa tells lies. Rosa says that both Berta and Greta tells lies. Who is telling the truth? So there you go. Interesting puzzle. I'll leave that one with you. But there's lots of those in there, and fortunately the answers are all at the back, but it does mean that you have plenty of time to actually, rather than being on the same page where it's easy for your eyes to scan down, it really, I'm a firm believer. There is a website called brilliant.org, and they present all kinds of puzzles and questions covering mathematics, physics, chemistry. It's really worth a look, but I just find that doing 1 or 2 of these problems every day keeps my brain ticking over, stops it from becoming atrophied. So I really enjoy those kinds of things. My friend Dermot McCulloch has had 2 books published since I last bought a book of his, and they were both available on the same shelf in the theology section. And they are A History of Christianity, the first 3 millennia, and that is quite deliberate because what he wants you to take away from a subtitle like the first 3 millennia is the idea that Christianity is not a religion of the past. It's also got a future, and so it's about knowing how we got to where we are and how we're going to move forward to where we're going to end up. I don't always agree with every conclusion that Dermot draws, but he is by far and away the cleverest person I have ever known. And I've known some really clever people, but he is an astonishingly erudite man who is also incredibly humble, and he wears his learning so lightly you wouldn't know just how clever the man is until you really begin to scratch the surface and go underneath everything with him. He is a very affable, likeable person, but his scholarship is absolutely second to none. And I'm really going to look forward to reading this, even the bits that I will inevitably disagree with him about, because that's not the point. Isn't the point with Dermot is not that you agree with him, but that you think about what he said. And that, to me, is the mark of a great mind. Someone who doesn't feel challenged by disagreement, someone who enjoys stimulating other people to think and argue with him, and so come to a better, move the conversation forward. You come to a better understanding by the differences of opinion and interpretation. Dermot is an Anglican. I think his grandfather was a bishop. I can't recall now. Certainly a family member. I think it was his grandfather was a bishop in the Anglican Church, and he's quite candid about. He doesn't necessarily have a Christian faith anymore, but he is a critical friend. He understands Christianity and he appreciates what it has achieved and how it has helped people. So I guess I would describe him more as agnostic with a friendly disposition. That he's not convinced about the idea of God, but if he were to be convinced of the idea of God, it would definitely be a Christian God that he would be convinced about. So it's that he's a critical friend, and I think that's the right kind of friend to have. He's also published a series of lectures he gave about silence in Christianity, and there's some really nice bits and pieces in here, and it's actually an interesting idea, because particularly in the old liturgy of the Catholic Church, I mean less so in the more modern liturgy, which I've mentioned before is more of an activist liturgy, which is people involved, which is not a bad thing in its own right. But particularly the older style of liturgy, where everything was done in very low voices and very quietly, with long periods of seemingly nothing happening, but actually quite a lot going on under the surface. There is and for me as a monk, there is a laudable tradition in silence. Silence is a way in which people who don't necessarily have one of the things about a monastic community is it's very like a family. And very like a family, people can really get under each other's skin. And, St. Benedict was not averse to putting in his rule of St. Benedict that thou shalt not kill. So the idea that because you and everyone around you is a monk, therefore you're not going to do anything bad. Well, St. Benedict wasn't convinced by that, and he understood the human psyche extremely well, and understood the pressures that close proximity to each other would give. You would sit, as a monk, you sat next to the people you sat next to on the day that you joined until the day that one of you died. And that would be true at meals, it would be true at recreation, it would be true at prayer. So if you are in an antagonistic situation with somebody, it could really build. And one of the ways in which you deal with those pressures of proximity is by the use of silence. It gives space to both of you to not have to react to each other, to spend time together that isn't going to simply exacerbate issues. And there are lots of other important parts of silence. It's an opportunity to be open to the voice of God calling to you, an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard and read that day and what's happened to you. There are lots and lots of elements of silence which are very important, and particularly in our modern world where silence is almost as abhorrent to nature as a vacuum. It sometimes is not worth. It sometimes rather is not a bad idea. It's worth being reminded about the importance of silence. So I'm looking forward to reading his thoughts on that. And then my final purchase was slightly out of left field in many respects. I like to keep abreast of modern developments in theology. I don't always agree with a lot of them, but I like to keep abreast of them. And I was looking through the scriptural theology section, and I saw this book by Wilder C. Gaffney, which is Womanist Midrash. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what womanism is, feminism is kind of known but not fully understood by most people, and we can have very different ideas of what feminism is. But fundamentally, feminism has been a theory of liberation by white women for white women. And black pride has tended to be a theory of liberation by black men for black men. Womanism is a theory and an opportunity for the voices of black women to be heard, with their sharing some aspects of the subjugation of women through the ages, and sharing some aspects of the subjugation of people of colour through the ages, and bringing the two together in a unique way that neither feminism nor black power can actually, or black pride can actually match. And so this is... I've read the introduction and I was really taken by the introduction. So what the idea of this, a midrash in scripture, is a Jewish rabbi, a learned Jewish rabbi, commentary on passages of scripture. And what Ms. Gaffney is doing in this book is to rediscover and to allow the voices of women in the Old Testament, or in the Hebrew Bible, whichever you prefer to describe, to be heard in their own terms. So to really flag up and point out the unique role that certain women have played. And of course, being the history of the Hebrew people in Egypt and in the Levant, these are going to be women of colour on the whole, either Egyptians and therefore Africans, or Middle Eastern and therefore Semitic. They're not. It's all part of a rediscovery of the role of women of colour in the formative myths and traditions of the Western world, and maybe drawing some lessons for today on what this is telling us in the inspired word of Scripture, as she would believe. So it's I think it's I'm always open to hearing new voices anyway, and this will come with a particular slant of understanding which I would not have access to because I'm neither a person of colour nor a woman. And so I think it's going to be really quite an interesting book to read. And I've read the introduction, and the introduction is presented as an invitation to come into the dinner table, bring your own dishes of food with you, and share the cultural banquet with all the people around, and that this is an invitation open to women and to men. And I'm really taken. I like the idea of chewing the cud, as it were, of the meal being the centerpiece by which we come together and share and understand each other better. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I'll let you know about anything that strikes me as particularly interesting that I might want to share with you. There is one thing I forgot to talk about last week, and I went to... I'd not been feeling well most of last week, as you know, but on the Friday evening I went out with a couple of people from work to meet up with a former colleague and friend who is a viewer of this podcast, and she was one of the very first subscribers to this podcast, so she has been with me from the very beginning, and that's my friend Rachel. You may remember when she left us about 7 or 8 months ago now, I made her a butterfly shawl, and I'll put a picture of the butterfly shawl in here if I can find one for you. And she really loved it, and that was very gratifying. Now, when she went to work for Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team, and I'm a great fan of Mercedes, mostly through Lewis Hamilton, but they have been 4 times world champions in a row, and their drivers between them have been 4 times world champions, which is a huge achievement. 4 times or 3 times? 4 times, isn't it? Yes, 4 times world champions. Yeah, Lewis twice, Nico once, and then Lewis again. That's right. Well, as a company, she works for, it's a global brand, and she's really enjoying the work. But as a company, they provide sporting memorabilia, which is signed by their drivers and sent out to people. And there was a cap which had been signed by Nico Rosberg, and he had put in his own handwriting "to Pete" on it. And nobody knew who the Pete was that this was intended for, and it had been left behind when Nico left the team. And so Rachel saw it and thought of me. And so here I have my own Formula One World Champions cap, which is a very nice cap. And it's signed by Nico Rosberg and addressed to Pete. So that's a very nice thing to be given. It was very kind of her to think of me, and I was very touched by the fact that she saw it and immediately thought of me. So I'm very pleased with that. So thank you very much, Rachel. And I've shared that now with you all, so I hope you all enjoy seeing it. I think that's probably going to be it for the day. I can't think of anything. There are a couple of other things I was going to talk about, but I've already been wittering away for over an hour now, so I think it's time for me to wind up, and I will speak to you all again next week. Do look out for the extra episode of Rambling On, and I promise I will also get uploaded the next 3 parts of Anna Karenina, for those of you who are hanging on to my every word and desperate for me to get those parts uploaded. I am feeling a lot better. It may not be tomorrow because I was going to go in and see Bob today, but because he's having the surgery this afternoon, I've said that he's likely to feel groggy and not really up to seeing people in the immediate aftermath. So I will pop in and see him after work tomorrow. Hopefully he'll be coming out very soon, and I've said that I'll go up with Wendy to help her bring him home. And so I will intend to get it uploaded, but I want to get this uploaded and get the other video edited first, and then I'll do the Anna Kareninas for you. So until next week, stay happy, stay well. I keep making a mistake on that. Stay happy, stay well, stay safe, and keep crafting. So bye for now. Hello again. I finished off the video and I knew there was something in the back of my head and I couldn't remember what it was. I wanted to talk a little bit about Ravelry. I've noticed that more and more people are joining in the conversations on Ravelry. I'm going to be opening 2 new threads this week. The first is a little bit of fun. I want you to tell us 3 facts about yourself, 2 of which are true and the third is not. But don't tell us which ones they are, and I want to see whether people can guess what those facts might be, the accurate ones and the not accurate ones. And so to start the ball rolling, I thought I'd give 3 facts about myself. So, fact number 1. When I was 13 years old, I served the papal mass of St John Paul II in Heaton Park in Manchester on the 31st of May 1982, at which he ordained 12 men to the priesthood. Fact 2, I once had a portrait painted of my legs. Fact 3, I have been a #1 selling album. So, which one of these is, two of these rather, are true, and which one isn't? I will be opening up the thread in Ravelry, and I look very much forward to hearing what you've got to say. I will announce next week which one is false and which ones are true, and explain a little bit about each of them for you. So that's thread number 1. The second thread I want to open, I have decided to host a make-along. So, I will be opening up a thread in the next week, which is a kind of preparation thread for the make-along. The theme of the make-along is going to be summer. And I'm being very careful to call it a make-along, because some of you will want to knit, and some of you will want to crochet, and some of you will want to sew, and some of you will want to weave, and I'm quite happy for you to do absolutely anything, but the theme has to, in some way, reflect summer. So, it can either be an item that you would use in the summer, it can be a pattern that has some kind of summery theme, or it can be a yarn or fabric or anything else which is related to summer, or is called summer, or is designed by someone called Summer. I guess there will be some females out there called Summer who design items. So anything that you can present as a summer-related item. I will be hosting the make-along. It will be running for the months of April and May. So basically Easter until the beginning of the main part of the summer, so that we get these things ready to use them when summer arrives. So we've got the rest, well, basically we've got March to plan what it is that we're going to do, and then we start doing what we're going to do at the beginning of April, and I will open up other threads in Ravelry for chatter about what you're going to make and for whips, but there will also be one thread which is for finished objects. You can have as many finished objects as you like. If you have a finished object which is both a summer related item and uses a summer related fabric or pattern or whatever, then you get 2 entries. And so you just enter it twice. And I haven't decided yet what the prize will be, but I can assure you it will be a prize that you will want to have. So, our very first make-along, and I will be opening up the thread for you to start discussing ideas that might be summer related. And don't forget, a little bit of fun. The other thread will be 2 facts about yourself that are true and 1 that isn't, and then see if we can guess which is which. So, until next time, I will sign off again. I'll probably stick this in after the end of the previous video, so stay happy, stay well, stay safe, and keep crafting. So, bye for now.